This isn't just a story, it's a cry from the soul of nature. The lake was still, a glass mirror under a sky heavy with stormlight, its silence hiding something sacred, something lost. But then a tremble. Not from the wind, not from the trees, from the water. It was faint, like a whisper from the wild itself. And Grayson heard it. He paused, mid-cast, standing barefoot on the frost-bitten shore, his fishing rod frozen mid-air, his eyes narrowed. That shape in the icy water wasn't driftwood. And it certainly wasn't a dog. No, it was something else. Something alive. Or once alive. Only the tiniest flick of ears betrayed the truth. A bobcat kitten, wild, alone, and drowning. His body was barely afloat, just a trembling, sodden scrap of fur slipping under again and again. The water was devouring him in slow, cruel gulps, and in that moment time did not stretch, it snapped. Grayson didn't hesitate. There was no what if, no plan. He let go of the rod, kicked off his boots, and dove straight into the glacial black. The lake swallowed him like knives down his spine, but the pain didn't register. All he saw was that life, small, fragile, unfinished, disappearing beneath the surface. He reached him just as the kitten's head sank below for what should have been the final time. The little body was limp in his arms, eyes glassy, chest frighteningly still. But Grayson held him tight, cradling the wild thing against his chest, whispering through chattering teeth, "Don't you die on me? Not now." When the soul of a creature cries out in silence, it takes a human heart to listen and to leap. With the kitten clutched close, he swam back, not just against the icy current, but against time itself, as if wrestling death with bare hands. Every stroke was a promise, every gasp was a prayer, and when he finally collapsed onto the shore, breathless, freezing, and soaked to the bone, the kitten was still there, but barely. His small form sagged like a soaked rag. No mule, no twitch. No breath, just the weight of a miracle slipping through fingers. Grayson ripped off his jacket, pressed the wild kitten to his bare chest, and whispered again, "Stay, please stay." In that moment, the human and the animal became one flame against the cold. The cabin wasn't far, but it felt like miles, a brutal distance made crueler by the weight in Grayson's arms. He ran barefoot through the underbrush, soaked too, the skin holding not just a fading kitten, but a flickering thread between wilderness and wonder. His breath tore from his lungs in short, painful bursts, but he didn't stop. Couldn't. The woods blurred past, trees bowed under snow, earth soft and merciless. By the time he reached the door, he didn't bother with keys. He slammed his shoulder against the wooden frame, burst through, and fell to his knees. The kitten still clutched like a holy relic. The fire had burned low through the night, a weak orange ember barely breathing in the hearth. Grayson laid the tiny body on a wool blanket before the fireplace, the same one his old dog had slept. That dog was gone now, buried beneath a hill of snow last winter, but the memory of warmth lingered in the threads. Grayson dove for the hearth, feeding it dry logs, shaking hands stuffing kindling into the coals. Sparks rose like fireflies into the gloom. Heat crept into the room, fighting back the frozen air, but still, the kitten didn't move, not a twitch. His little form curled on its side, unnaturally still. His fur was soaked in icy mats, water dripping from whiskers onto the old fabric. Fire is not just flame, it is a heartbeat. And sometimes it's all we have to call the lost ones back. Grayson grabbed the thick towel, the one stained with time and memory, and began to dry the kitten, gently but urgently. He worked from spine to paws, whispering under breath, "Come on, little guy, come back." But the kitten's paw pads were colorless, frozen like tiny stones. Grayson leaned in, ear to fur, barely a rise, almost imperceptible. No cry, no breath, just the eerie quiet of something caught between worlds. Panic fought reason. Grayson ran to the kitchen, yanked open the cabinet, and found the dusty thermos still half full. He filled a rubber glove with hot water, tied it shut, and tucked it against the kitten's belly. Then another towel, then a blanket, then silence. Just waiting. Every few seconds, he reached forward and laid a shaking hand on the kitten's ribs. Still, Still, the clock ticked. 30 minutes, 40, an hour, still, and then a flutter. A twitch of breath, or maybe just hope? His paw stirred. A shudder from the chest. Grayson bolted upright. The kitten's ear flicked. And then a sound, not a meow, but something deeper. A raw gasp from the edge of death. Grayson's voice cracked. "You're still here," he whispered. "You're still with me." And outside, the snow fell harder, as if the storm was mourning the moment. But inside there was heat. There was breath. And a single stubborn flicker of life. The storm raged into morning, slamming icy fists against the cabin walls, but inside the world had gone silent. Grayson hadn't moved from the floor. His back ached. His clothes still clung wet to his skin, but none of that mattered. His eyes were fixed on the kitten, tiny, shivering, but breathing. Every breath was a thread stretched thin across a chasm, but it held. He leaned forward as the kitten stirred again. One paw reached out weakly, barely nudging the towel. Then those eyes, not fierce yet, not wild, just dazed, cracked open. Pale gold, cloudy with cold and confusion. He didn't growl, didn't hiss, just looked, exposed, soft, raw, like a whisper from the soul of the forest. "You made it," Grayson murmured. The kitten tried to move but collapsed again, no strength left. Grayson reached for a bowl of warm goat milk and dipped a finger in. He touched it to the kitten's lips. Nothing, then a flick of the tongue. And then another. Grayson exhaled, the tension cracking like ice. The kitten licked again, slow, uncertain but alive. "You're a fighter," he said, "a stubborn little wild thing. Sometimes the wild chooses us, not to tame it, but to remind us that love doesn't ask for species, only presence." He studied the bobcat, still no larger than a loaf of bread, ears oversized, legs all awkward angles. But his breath had steadied, his eyes stayed open longer now. He was holding on? Grayson leaned his head against the wall, eyes damp, heart thudding with something he hadn't felt in years. Not since the dog. Not since the last fire went out. In his life, he hadn't planned on saving anything today. He wasn't trained for this. No rehab license. No gear, no textbook on wildcat rescue. But it didn't matter. None of it did. Because life, raw, sacred, beautiful life, had fallen into his arms, and he had answered. And in that quiet hour between firelight and the storm, something ancient stirred between man and animal. A bond not born of ownership, but of grace. An animal is calling, will you answer? He wasn't just a wild animal anymore. He wasn't just some injured rescue gasping at the edge of survival. Something had shifted quietly, almost imperceptibly, in the warmth of that firelight. It was in the way the kitten watched Grayson, unblinking, not as a predator, not as prey, but as something else entirely, something rooted in a trust deeper than instinct. His golden eyes didn't narrow when Grayson moved closer. He didn't flinch when the man reached for the fire. There was no fear in him, no tension, no trace of the wild panic that had once seized his tiny body in the lake. Just stillness, just presence. And Grayson felt it, the kind of silence that speaks louder than any cry. He sat there, staring back, and the words slipped from his lips like a breath he didn't know he was holding. "You're not going anywhere, are you?" The kitten blinked slowly, as if to say, "No, I've already chosen." And Grayson smiled. "Okay, then." He rubbed the back of his neck and chuckled softly, almost to himself. "I guess we'll need a name." There is a point where love stops asking for permission, and simply remains. The storm had passed by morning, but the sky was still, glassy, pale, the kind of quiet that feels holy. Snow dusted the pine branches outside, and from the chimney, smoke curled like a warm thread into the air. Inside, the air smelled of firewood and something old, something safe. The bobcat kitten was awake, not moving much, but awake, curled in the nest of towels and wool blankets that had become his sanctuary. His breathing was steady now, not shallow and fading like before. His fur had dried and fluffed out slightly, revealing pale spots on his legs and a creamy white underside. No longer a ghost pulled from frozen water, but a living thing, a baby bobcat who had survived something impossible. Grayson entered the room quietly, carrying a small bowl of warm milk mixed with finely shredded chicken. "Morning, kid," he said softly, kneeling beside him. The kitten lifted his head just slightly, then to Grayson's astonishment took a single step forward, wobbly, unsure, but it was a step. His tiny pink nose nudged toward the bowl, and he began to eat, awkward, slow, milk dribbling from his mouth as his body trembled from the effort. He could only manage a few laps before his legs buckled and he stopped, exhausted, but it was more than yesterday, much more. And Grayson smiled like someone witnessing a miracle in real time. "That's it," he whispered, his voice cracking. "You're doing it." Grayson didn't touch him. Not yet. He just stayed close, sitting quietly on the floor beside him, allowing his presence to be felt like warmth from a fire, soft and steady. There were no fences between them, no leash, no commands. Just breath and time. A kind of sacred silence that only animals truly understand. And then, as if drawn by an invisible thread, the kitten stood again, 2 uncertain steps. Then he curled against Grayson's leg, pressed his small body against denim, and closed his eyes. Grayson froze, his breath caught mid-chest. He didn't move. He couldn't. This was a wild creature, a predator, choosing to lean against a man, not out of desperation, not out of hunger, but something deeper. Something that said, "Here, you are safe." Tears burned at the edges of Grayson's vision. He reached out slowly, not daring to break the moment, and placed his hand near the kitten's back. Not touching, just close. The kitten shifted again, closer. Grayson exhaled, a broken breath laced with awe. The firelight danced in his tired eyes, casting long shadows that shimmered across the walls. "I guess it's you and me now," he whispered. "Trust is the truest kind of magic, not demanded, not trained, but offered freely from a soul that remembers what safety feels like." By the 3rd day, the kitten, now called Finn, was eating from Grayson's hand. His bites were still soft, his jaw still unsure, but there was a hunger behind those golden eyes now. A hunger not just for food, but for life or connection. Grayson spoke to him constantly, his voice always low, warm, deliberate. Not because Finn understood the words, but because he understood the sound, the tone, the heartbeat behind them. And by the end of the week, Finn could stand on all 4s. His legs were wobbly and unsure like a fawn learning the ground, but he could move. He followed Grayson from room to room, a silent shadow with paws. He didn't meow, didn't cry. He just was always there, watching, learning, becoming. He slept curled near the fire, ate from a folded towel, and spent hours at the window, watching the birds in the trees as if trying to remember the language of the wild. But not all wounds fade. Not all memories release their grip. And for Finn, water was still the enemy. It began with the faucet. Grayson turned it on casually to wash his hands, and Finn froze. His back arched, his eyes widened, and he backed into the corner like a ghost returning to his grave. The sound of rain on the roof made him pace, restless and tight. Dripping boots by the door sent him bolting under the couch. A spilled glass of water brought full-body trembles, fast breathing, flat ears, wild eyes. Grayson watched it happen over and over. The stillness, the fear, the quiet collapse, even safe, even warm, even loved. Finn was still there, still in the lake, still cold, still alone. The body may heal, but the soul remembers the flood. Grayson tried not to push him. He moved softly when the kettle steamed. He kept towels ready to catch spills before they touched the floor. He didn't ask for progress, he just waited. One evening, as a few drops of snowmelt hit the wooden planks, Finn slipped under the table, curled tight, eyes locked on the tiny puddle, and Grayson saw it, the full weight of it. Someone hadn't just abandoned him. Someone had tried to erase him, drown his memory, drown his will. And Finn had survived anyway, but he hadn't escaped untouched. That night, Grayson stayed across the room and whispered, "Whatever you saw out there, whatever you went through, you don't have to go through it again." He said it not as comfort, but as covenant. As a man who had once been broken himself, who had known grief and silence and the desperate need to be heard without having to explain. And now he would offer that gift to something wild, something small, something that chose him. And in that flickering firelight where pain met patience, something new began to grow, not just survival, but healing. This story isn't about taming the wild. It's about listening to it and letting it teach you how to feel again. But that morning, Finn didn't move. He didn't blink. He didn't flinch. He just stared forward, his gaze glassy and distant, as if haunted by the shadows only he could see. And in that unbearable stillness, Grayson understood, truly understood, that what this tiny, fragile, wild soul had survived was more than most hearts could ever carry. This wasn't just a kitten rescued from a lake. This was a being who had crawled through terror, betrayal, and a silence so deep it could shatter the spirit. It had been 2 weeks since Grayson pulled Finn from that icy grave. The kitten had grown stronger, visibly so. He moved with ease now, fluid, steady, grace beginning to return to his limbs. He leapt to the windowsill like it had always belonged to him. He batted softly at floating dust motes caught in golden morning light. He devoured his meals without pause. But fear still flickered behind those golden eyes like a flame too stubborn to die. It lived in the way he tensed when it rained, in the way his ears twitched when the faucet dripped, in how he recoiled from his reflection in a bowl of water. Grayson couldn't shake it. Something in his gut, some old ache mixed with rage, needed answers. Not for himself, but for Finn. So one morning just past dawn, he zipped up his coat, poured a thermos of coffee, and walked back to the lake. The past leaves fingerprints on the soul, and some silences are louder than screams. The shoreline was as he remembered. Sharp wind scraping across the water's glassy face, rocks coated in frost. Trees looming like sentinels of forgotten pain. The stillness was haunting. Grayson stepped carefully, scanning every inch of the place where he had first seen those ears, barely twitching above the surface. Something in him demanded to see it, to feel it, to know. And then there it was, half buried under a layer of frozen leaves, a nylon cord, bright blue, torn jagged at one end. Next to it a black scrap of fabric, shredded, soaked with dirt, the corner of what looked like a mesh duffel or small trap. Drag marks carved into the mud led from the tree line. Straight to the lake. Grayson fell to his knees. His chest tightened, his hands trembled. Finn hadn't fallen in. He hadn't wandered. He had been dumped, tied, bagged, left like trash. The vision came, uninvited and brutal, a tiny body thrashing against wet fabric, lungs heaving, paws clawing in. Blind panic. He wasn't supposed to be found. He was supposed to vanish, swallowed by the water and forgotten. Grayson clenched the cord in his fist, his knuckles white with fury. The lake looked calm now, peaceful even, but he saw it for what it truly was, a grave that had been denied. Finn didn't survive because someone saved him. He survived because he refused to surrender. "I don't know who you were running from," Grayson whispered, standing slowly, "but you're not running anymore." The season shifted like breath warming in the lungs. The days grew longer. Winter softened. Ice gave way to buds and birdsong. Early spring crept gently into the woods beyond the cabin. And Finn became something else. His body changed first, the bony frame now wrapped in thick, dappled fur. His legs, once shaking, now glided with quiet strength. He didn't move like a kitten anymore. He moved like wind, like shadow. Silent, precise, alive. He leapt from chair to windowsill, scaled the wooden beams across the ceiling, perched on high shelves like a sentry. And his eyes, once cloudy with fear, now gleamed with wild gold, sharp, focused, awake. He watched the world not with wonder, but with memory. With purpose. He had been broken, but he was healing. Grayson saw it every day. Every morning, Finn would stand at the window longer. Nose lifted to the breeze. Ears twitching toward the whisper of the trees. Something inside him had started to pull, not away from Grayson, but toward something older. Something in his blood. And Grayson, though it broke him, understood. This was never meant to last. To love the wild is to know when to open your hands and let it fly. Finn had survived because of Grayson, But he would not stay because of him. He was a bobcat. A creature carved from sky and stone. Not meant for living rooms, not built for fireplaces. That night, Grayson sat beside him at the hearth. Finn curled near, not touching, but close. "You're not meant to be here forever, are you?" he whispered. Finn didn't move. Didn't need to. The silence between them said everything. So the next morning, Grayson got to work. He walked to the edge of the clearing near the trees and began to build. Not a cage, not a trap, but a threshold. Part shelter, part goodbye. A place. Made of pine branches and burlap, old lumber and love. A roof to keep out rain, a corner for food. A soft place to rest. When it was done, he left the cabin door open. Finn didn't run, he didn't hesitate. He walked, quiet, calm, sure, and at the tree line he paused, turned back, their eyes met. Man and wild soul, no fear, no confusion, just something deeper. Something like thank you. And then Finn disappeared, like wind, like mist, like he had never been there at all. But Grayson stood in that clearing long after the cold bit at his fingers. He told himself it was right. That he had done what? Was best, that Finn needed freedom. But the silence left behind was louder than thunder. 3 days passed. The door stayed open. Grayson left food by the shelter. But nothing came. No paw prints in the snow. No shape among the trees. Just quiet, heavy, sharp. He caught himself. Listening for the soft thud of paws, the quiet stir of movement, the small breath beside the fire. But the cabin stayed still. It was nature, he told himself. Wild things are meant to go. And yet, his eyes kept checking the window. His ears kept straining toward the door. Until the fourth night, just before dawn, Grayson woke. No reason. No sound, just a pressure, a pull. He rose, pulled on his coat, stepped out into the frost. The world was still. The sky a pale blue breath, the forest black and silent, and then a rustle. A shadow, a shape, not hiding, not afraid, just there. Standing at the edge of the clearing, freedom given in love always finds its way home. Finn, but not the same, bigger now. Stronger, his coat shimmered like moonlit stone, and his eyes, they caught the dawn like gold held to fire. They stared at each other for a long time. No one moved. No one spoke. Then Finn stepped forward, not to the door, not to Grayson, but to the shelter. He circled it once, sat at the flat stone where food had been left, and waited, watching. Grayson didn't move, didn't break the moment. This wasn't reunion. This was respect. Finn had returned, not because he had to, not because he was tame, but because something in him remembered. The fire, the hands that didn't let go, the man who had jumped into death to hold on to him. He stayed for an hour, then vanished, no sound, no fuss. Just gone, but Grayson smiled, truly smiled, because now he understood. Finn wasn't gone. He was free. And freedom, when built on trust, always knows the way home. Some say wild animals don't love, that they adapt, that they survive, but don't feel. Grayson would never believe that again, because every few days, just before dawn, Finn would return, never too close, never asking, just present. A shadow at the edge of light. Sometimes he curled near the shelter, breathing steady. Sometimes he watched the sunrise, then slipped away into the trees, and Grayson never called him. Never. Caged him. Because what they had wasn't ownership, it was choice. Finn had been discarded, drowned, left for nothing. But he chose to live, and more than that, he chose to come back. Not as a pet, not as a possession, but as something rarer, family, because family isn't always who shares your blood. Sometimes it's a heartbeat beside you in the silence. Sometimes it's a shadow that remembers the warmth of your fire. And sometimes, just sometimes, it's a wild soul who knows your name without needing to say it, if this story moved you. If you believe, like we do, that love and trust can cross even the wildest distances, subscribe to Jungle Diaries, because here, every heartbeat counts.